The Widow, episode 25. A year after the death of her beloved Ricardo, Lavra, the widow, still carried the weight of grief in her eyes. The coldness she had built as a shield was almost impenetrable until the charming and mysterious Eduardo appeared in her life. His gentle smiles began to melt the ice fortress Lavra had erected around her heart. But Laura's happiness is a fragile flame, threatened by a sinister shadow, Ricardo's brother Fernando, who always secretly loved Lavra and now, consumed by rage and obsession, plans to destroy everything she has achieved, including her new love. Will Eduardo's love be strong enough to overcome Fernando's cruel revenge? Lavra walked along the beach, the cool sand under her bare feet. The strong wind ruffled her black hair, as if trying to erase the memories that insisted on lingering in her mind. It had been a year since Ricardo, her beloved, had passed away. A year since the sea had claimed his body, leaving Lavra only the immensity of longing. She remembered Ricardo's smile, the sparkle in his dark eyes, the embrace that enveloped her in a warmth she now only found in dreams. But Lavra learned to be strong. She built an ice wall around her heart, an impenetrable fortress to protect herself from new pain, until Eduardo arrived. He was a hurricane in her serene life of mourning, a whirlwind of smiles, flowers, and affectionate gestures that gradually melted the glacier she had created. Lavra resisted, of course. After all, how could she allow herself to love again after so much suffering? How could she trust a new love when the previous one had been taken from her so cruelly? But Eduardo's intense gaze, his soft voice, his protective hand, were like rays of sun penetrating the cracks in her armor. She felt, yes, an irresistible attraction to Eduardo, something that frightened her and at the same time made her float in uncertain happiness. It was as if a small flower had sprung up in the middle of the frozen winter of her heart, a delicate sprout that needed care and protection. And Eduardo, with his kindness and perseverance, was the careful gardener who watered her with tenderness. But Laura's happiness was a garden of flowers in the middle of a desert, a fragile flame threatened by impending darkness. Fernando, Ricardo's brother, watched everything from afar. His dark eyes reflected not only the sadness of losing his brother, but also an incandescent fury. Fernando had always secretly loved Lavra, a silent, dark love, fueled by admiration and the pain of seeing her surrender to his brother. Now, Laura's love for Eduardo was an affront, a betrayal of his memory in Fernando's distorted vision. He couldn't accept that another person could take Ricardo's place in the heart of the woman he so desired. With each passionate encounter between Lavra and Eduardo, Fernando felt the venom of rage and obsession corroding his insides. He not only wanted to separate them but wanted to destroy Lavra, making her suffer as much as he suffered. In his troubled mind, Fernando planned an elaborate revenge, a web of lies and manipulations aimed at destroying the happiness of Lavra and Eduardo. He watched, waited for the right moment, planning each step to achieve his goal. The darkness within Fernando was as deep and overwhelming as the ocean that had swallowed Ricardo. He was the lone wolf, lurking in the shadows, ready to attack the moment love bloomed. Lavra, in her naivete, did not perceive the approaching storm. She was so involved in the sweet illusion of her new love, so surrendered to Eduardo's affections, that she did not notice the sinister shadow lengthening behind the dunes. She smiled, her eyes shone, and the sound of the ocean waves was the melody of her nascent happiness. But the sea, which had previously stolen her love, could now bring an even more devastating storm. At that moment, under the setting sun that painted the sky in orange and red hues, Lavra felt a fleeting peace. The sea breeze caressed her face and the salty scent refreshed her soul. Eduardo was waiting for her with a passionate gaze and a smile that promised moments of intense happiness. She walked towards him, unaware that her walk towards happiness could be abruptly interrupted by the claws of Fernando's revenge. Laura's destiny, like a storm at sea, seemed uncertain, tossing her between the promise of a new life and imminent danger. Doubt haunted her mind. Would Eduardo's love be able to withstand the devastating force of Fernando's revenge? Or would fate be so cruel as to steal her happiness once again? The answer was lost in the ocean waves, in the shadows of the night, and in the clutches of Fernando's dark secret, which seethed like a volcano about to erupt. Lavra let herself be enveloped by the sweetness of Eduardo's gaze, forgetting, for a moment, the pang of fear that insisted on haunting her. The joy of being with him, of feeling his strong and protective embrace, was almost a drug, a relief from the pain that insisted on corroding her inside. But even in the midst of that fleeting happiness, a thread of unease ran down her spine. It was as if a bad premonition nestled in her heart, a dark whisper telling her that happiness would not last forever. Eduardo, noticing the hesitation in her eyes, pulled her closer, enveloping her in a protective embrace that soothed her. He whispered sweet words in her ear, promises of a future together, a future without shadows, without the pain that had plagued her for so long. He kissed her, a gentle kiss that gave her a moment of pure happiness, a brief respite before the storm. Lavra surrendered to the kiss, drowning in the sea of emotions that Eduardo awakened within her. But Fernando watched, hidden in the shadows. The romantic scene by the sea drove him mad with rage. Laura's love for Eduardo was a sharp knife in his heart. He clenched his fists, his fingers white as bone, as a cruel smile crept onto his lips. Laura's happiness would be fleeting, he thought. He would ensure that. In the days that followed, Fernando began to weave his web of lies. Small details, subtle insinuations that gradually undermined Laura's trust in Eduardo. He spread rumors in the town, insinuating that Eduardo had ulterior motives, that he was only interested in Laura's fortune. Fernando's words, like poison, began to contaminate Laura's mind, planting seeds of doubt in her heart. Lavra initially rejected Fernando's insinuations. She trusted Eduardo, felt the truth in his eyes, in the warmth of his embrace. But Fernando's insistence, his fixed and hateful gaze, disturbed her. The seed of doubt, masterfully planted, began to sprout in her heart, creating a crack in the trust she had in her new love. Eduardo, noticing the change in Laura's behavior, tried to calm her, to assure her of his love. But his words seemed to echo in a void, lost in the whirlwind of uncertainties that Fernando had created. The joy and lightness that had previously characterized their relationship were now replaced by a palpable tension, an uncomfortable coldness that grew every day. Meanwhile, Fernando watched, savoring the success of his evil plan. He saw the fear in Laura's eyes, the despair in her heart, and it fueled him. With each tear from Lavra, Fernando felt a perverse triumph, a morbid satisfaction that corroded him inside. Lavra, torn between the love she felt for Eduardo and the doubt that Fernando had planted in her soul, desperately sought an answer, a solution to the dilemma that consumed her. She was at a crossroads between the radiant glow of the flame of her new love and the threatening darkness of Fernando's revenge. The storm was approaching, and Lavra felt helpless in the face of the fury of nature and human malice. The future seemed uncertain, and doubt, like an oppressive fog, obscured the path to her happiness. Lavra needed to discover the truth before the storm destroyed everything she had rebuilt with so much effort. Time was running out, and Fernando's shadow lengthened, threatening like a monster about to attack. Lavra, hesitant, watched Eduardo from afar as he smiled and gesticulated animatedly, telling some anecdote. The afternoon sun painted his face a golden hue, but the light could not reach the shadow that covered Laura's heart. Fernando's words like thorns pierced her mind. "He only wants your money, Lavra. Don't trust him." Doubt, a cold serpent, slithered through her veins, undermining the joy she had previously felt beside Eduardo. The image of Eduardo, once so perfect and radiant, now became distorted, obscured by uncertainty. She remembered the happy moments, the passionate kisses, the embraces that gave her a sense of security. But now, every affectionate gesture from Eduardo was analyzed with suspicion. Every word was filtered through the lens of distrust. The smile that once charmed her now seemed false, calculating. The happiness she had found in his arms seemed to slip away like sand between her fingers. The sea breeze, once soft and comforting, now carried with it the weight of doubt, the chill of betrayal. The waves, which once seemed to whisper words of love, now roared like a warning of imminent danger. Lavra felt divided between the trust that still stubbornly resisted in her heart and the growing feeling that she was being deceived. She wanted to believe in Eduardo. She wanted to trust the love that had been reborn in her soul. But the seed of distrust, so skillfully planted by Fernando, had already sprouted, poisoning her happiness. Fernando, hidden in the shadows, watched the scene. A cruel and calculating smile spread across his lips. He knew his plot was working. The words he had planted in her mind were now germinating, suffocating Laura's joy, destroying her newfound happiness. He watched Laura's suffering, the confusion in her eyes, the despair that seized her heart. It was a feast for his tormented soul. Eduardo, noticing Laura's distance, tried to approach, but she recoiled. Her eyes, once full of love, now reflected uncertainty and fear. He extended his hand, trying to reach hers, but Lavra hesitated, struggling against the whirlwind of emotions that assailed her. Trust, the foundation of their relationship, had cracked, becoming a chasm between them. Lavra, amidst that anguish, felt a tightness in her chest, the sensation of drowning in a sea of doubts. The happiness she had built with Eduardo was transforming into a sandcastle, threatening to collapse at any moment. She sought a way out, an answer, but only found the echo of her own uncertainties. The cold sea breeze blew against her face, and she closed her eyes, seeking strength to face the approaching storm. She needed to make a decision that could change the course of her life forever. Trust Eduardo and risk the possibility of another disappointment, or yield to Fernando's insinuations and lose the only happiness she had found after Ricardo's loss. Doubt was a devastating force, a torment that lacerated her soul. At that moment, as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant colors of orange and red, Lavra felt a pang of hope. The love for Eduardo was real, she knew that. But the doubt was also real, and the need to discover the truth was essential. She would confront Fernando, she would find out if his words were the fruit of truth or revenge. Only then could she find peace, only then could she decide whether to embrace happiness again, or remain imprisoned in the darkness of doubt and fear. The final decision would be made soon, and the fate of her love, uncertain and threatened, was about to be sealed. The choice she would make would be definitive, shaping the future and determining the intensity of the love she felt for Eduardo and the malice of Fernando. The confrontation would come, and the truth, like a sharp sword, would cut through the dense fog that obscured her future. Lavra, seized by a sudden decision, left Eduardo standing there on the beach, the smile erased from his face, replaced by an expression of deep concern. She ran towards the house, driven by an unknown force, determined to confront Fernando. Fear lurked, yes, but the need to discover the truth was even stronger. She needed to know if Fernando's words were pure venom or a reflection of a bitter truth. Arriving home, she found Fernando sitting on the porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching the sea with an empty and cold gaze. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with a tension that cut the air like a knife. Lavra felt a shiver as she approached. Fernando looked at her, a cruel smile on his lips. He knew she was there to confront him, to demand answers. "You came, finally," said Fernando, his voice hoarse, laden with cruel sarcasm. "You must be curious to know the truth, aren't you? The truth about Eduardo, your new Prince Charming." Lavra, overcome by a mixture of anger and fear, approached him, her voice trembling. "I want to know if you're lying, Fernando. Tell me the truth. What do you know about Eduardo?" Fernando stood up, walking slowly towards Lavra, his eyes fixed on hers. He held her chin, forcing her to look at him. "The truth, my dear Lavra, the truth is crueler than you can imagine," he whispered, bringing his face close to hers. At that moment, a deafening scream cut through the silence of the night. A feminine scream, agonizing, full of despair. The sound seemed to come from inside the house. Lavra and Fernando looked at each other, fear etched on their faces. They ran inside, driven by terror, leaving behind the glass of whiskey that Fernando still held and the mystery that had settled over their lives. The door to the guest room was broken, and there on the floor lay the housekeeper, Donna Eulalia, with a knife plunged into her chest. Blood still gushed, forming a dark and frightening pool on the carpet. Lavra and Fernando looked at each other, petrified. A freezing terror enveloped them both. It wasn't just Donna Eulalia's death that shocked them. Next to the body, amidst the blood, was a small, metallic object that emitted a sinister and familiar glow. It was Ricardo's lighter, which Lavra thought she had lost at sea a year ago.